try to move this along quickly. Item 1 on the agenda was we've lost Joe Palmer. So we need someone that can take the meeting notes. I'm happy to do it for this evening. If we don't have somebody willing to commit that, I can do it based on the recording.
I can try to do that. I don't know how detailed you need to have it, but
it does not have to be detailed at all.
Detailed.
It's not a transcript.
Okay.
Basically, what the agenda was, what we, we voted on the minutes, what the vote was for that, anything else we voted on, generally what we discussed, what time we started, what time we adjourned, and that's about it.
Okay.
And who made the vote? What the vote was?
Who made the motion to do whatever.
Anybody that wants more information can watch a recording.
Yes. So just have we called the meeting to order? I'm sorry.
You are correct. I call this meeting to order at 6:41 p.m. Pilot Committee. Thank you. So Michelle will be taking minutes or notes. We can, as we discussed when Joe offered to do that, we can move that around, and people as their availability can do that. We don't have to have a specific commitment. Item 2 is approve the minutes of the last meeting. Out of issue of expediency, I suggest that we postpone that to a further meeting. Do I have a second on that?
Second.
Yep. Roll call vote would be Michelle.
Aye.
Kathy.
Aye.
And Frank.
Aye.
So Patty, go ahead and post the draft minutes with the town clerk, so we meet our 45 days.
I think Joe already did that, the
Okay.
last version of the town minutes. Okay, so the status report. So Michelle has done the bulk of the work over the last couple of weeks. So I actually would like to have her speak for a few minutes, and then we can move on from that.
Okay, so I have started contacting towns that have private schools like St. Mark's and Faith School, and I have a list, and it's on the shared drive. Unfortunately, not all towns have gotten back to me, but they are dribbling in still, and I don't know if you guys have had a chance to even look at that, or do you have that, Patty? The list so far?
I did. I got that today. Thank you. I just was.
It is on there, and there are some towns, I think Milton has been the most successful with their pilot committee. They haven't met since last March, and they actually have all their donations, and set town of Andover is also another liked one. There are towns that have gotten back to me saying if we could share the information with them, they'd be greatly appreciated. And there are towns like Marion, Massachusetts, said that basically, like, these schools don't contribute anything. And that list is on the shared drive. The other thing that I did do is I tried to make sense, and with the help of Patty, and still struggling. So the town has actually shared the real estate that St. Mark's has to date. The one thing that I noticed is that the ABC, what is it called? The ABC?
3 ABC.
3 ABC.
I'm not sure what it stands for, but there's quite a discrepancy. So the 3 ABCs in the actually list more real estate than the town has. So I actually put these lists together, and I have the towns, and I actually tried to make sense of the list, because they're all over the place, and I just put them in a list by the street address, what the town is charging, what the town is assessing the real estate. And then I, in yellow, are the ones that I added in there that are listed from the ABC. And I tried to also put in what capacity those buildings were. And the only one that I was not successful with is actually the New England Center for Children, because they list all of their buildings as education. They don't have anything as residential. So,
which is not true. Yeah. But
So-
Michelle, when you're saying that there was a differential between the three ABCs and the property listings from Paul,
Mhm.
remember we talked about the fact that the St. Mark's specifically groups their properties differently than the town does. So you have to do the deep dive into what the actual addresses of the properties are.
Right, I haven't quite finished that mapping thing that you showed.
Yeah.
I have not finished that, so I'm not saying that, I mean, they're grouped, like you said, like, I think St. Mark's Circle is under, Marlborough Road. So I have not actually got them. They're listed on there, but I haven't put that little map key that you showed me about. I can't remember what that's called, but I haven't done that.
All right. Yeah. And perhaps some of the rest of us can help you fine tune some of those details when you get bogged down. That's great.
And
So
also the
go ahead.
one other thing, the town is in the process of setting up a reassessment in November. They said that they're in the process of doing that for St. Mark's and Fay School property.
Wait a
Well,
minute. I
let
thought
me
they
let me clarify what
Yeah.
Michelle just said. So, every year, the assessor values all properties in the town, just like all assessors do, as of each January 1st. It just takes him a long time to get it done. He's got to look at sales, he's got to look at a lot of stuff. So he starts, and he is about to finish the valuation for 1/1/23, which is what our fiscal year 24 taxes are based on. That's why if you look at your August 1st and November 1st tax bills, you're going to see that they are nothing but estimates based on last year. They take last year's tax, divide it by 4, and you pay a fourth of that. Then your Q3 and Q4 bills due February 1st to May 1st will true it up. He will have the value. You'll see the actual assessed value of your property for the first time when you get your Q3 bill. And they will then take the total tax, subtract what you paid for Q1, Q2, and then divide that by the 2 payments. So it's not just St. Mark's and Fay. He's about to finish all of his townwide valuations for 1/1/23, and he'll come in from the
but-
select board next meeting and present all this.
But the properties are reassessed every 3 years, not
No,
correct?
that's a
Not
revaluation.
every.
That's a revaluation. So it's a terminology. So they're set every year. He assesses every single piece of property as of January 1st. So it's always different. So there's always an assessment of every property. Then, Patty, what they do every 3 years, they do a deep dive with so many properties. They actually go and visit the properties. They look and see what's changed that they may not have on the card. So that's what they do every 3 years.
Okay. And he's specifically including the private schools in these assessments, reassessment.
Yeah, no, he assesses
Yes.
all property, whether it's tax exempt or not. He probably doesn't spend a lot of time on the tax exempt properties because he probably doesn't see
Right.
any point in it. So that's why, last year, COVID has made the individual house prices go up so much because, people flocked out of the cities, and the commercial went down. So that's why our tax burden's gone up so much on houses because of this divergence between values for houses and values for commercial.
Which makes an equitable distribution here even more important.
Well, that's why, we've advisory and select board struggle so hard to keep the budget down, to try to keep the impact on the houses down to something that at least is tolerable.
Right. So I think that probably what we really need to do is, fair on this is to look at a 5-year history, perhaps, of the assessments and of the nonprofits versus private residential. And, we could compare those to the 5-year 3 ABCs because there is a difference between the assessments and 3 ABCs. And then, of course, the third leg of that is what other towns are receiving and how they go about receiving that money from their schools, right? So, Michelle, where do you think we're lacking in that information, or what can I provide because of the historical stuff I have?
Well, I mean, I only contacted the assessor's office of those towns. And
Right.
I actually just Googled private boarding schools in Massachusetts, and that's where I started the list. And
So there's other ones that aren't boarding schools, you know, and I'll put up the list that I came up with yet on that drive tomorrow. There's actually like 187. There's actually like 850 private schools in the state of Massachusetts. Okay. And then if we weed out, because we're taking out the religious schools, you know, that brings us down. I think I was down to realistically a number of, you know, like 150. And then we're taking out some of the, you know, other ones based on what they do or the size or something. But there is a significant list. I wasn't quite sure whether we should be foraying into perhaps New Hampshire, Vermont, because I think the pilot issue is not just within Massachusetts. This is something that other states and other communities have had to deal with. So is it worth looking at, you know, trim the list down to, you know, the 20 or 30 equitable schools compared to what we have here that are within the 3 adjoining states, or should we just stick within Massachusetts for an analysis?
I think the answer to that depends in part on where we're going with this. You know, are we going to end up with a recommendation to the select board as far as what we like to see the select board propose to especially Fay and St. Mark's, like, you know, like the Boston committee did that Michelle did the research on. Again, it's not binding. And as Michelle's already seen, this is all over the place what people do. There's no standard as far
Yes.
as what, so I don't think saying to St. Mark's, Phillips Andover, look what it does, is going to move the needle with them at all. They're going to say, good for them. They've got a, you know, $1 billion endowment.
Right. They've got an endowment.
Yeah.
Like,
And, you know, Rivers is, you know, is a good day school to, so there's several to look at, but where, you know, what are we going to do with this database? How are we going to end up with something similar to Milton, something similar to Boston, where we say, we really think this is what we should shoot for? And of course, Boston's got a ton of entities affected, right? We've got 3,
right.
4.
We're not even looking at, you know, college level stuff, which Boston is also dealing with.
Of course they are. So you know, they've got Harvard, BU, BC. They got the whole thing, right? We got Harvard here. We got the bookstore.
Yeah.
It would help, I think, to decide where we think we're going to try to end up here, and therefore understand whether we just, you know, we're going to use this information as a guide to what we might propose. But, you know, again, there's just no one model here. They're all over the place. I know, for example, you know, speaking of New Hampshire, I know KUA, Kimball Union Canopy, very well, because I've got a client that is a big donor there, and I know what they do because I've talked to the headmaster a lot about what they do. They pay for real estate taxes on everything except for their academic buildings. Their dorms too, they pay it. So they
I love that model.
Yep. So
I like that model.
Yep. And then I think at the end, we've got to put a dose of realism in this, as far as what we think, you know, if we think that St. Mark's is going to, you know, quadruple overnight what they pay, it's not in their budget. You know, I know for a fact they've got, I'm looking at what the letter they sent on my other screen this past year as far as what they pay. They've got this in their budget now. So that is a really good news that we know every year they know they're going to have an amount of money identified for these payments. So that's not what we used to have. It was just a go over and bag and see what they give us. So that's progress. We don't have the same thing with Bay School. We've got a whole new regime coming to both schools, new headmaster, new board chair, both places. They start next July 1st. So the only steady person we've got is the CFO of St. Mark's, who's a really good guy. He's local. He lives here. His wife does some things with some of the committees around here, so he's a, you know, he's a fan of Southborough. So I just think it would help if we knew where we're going as we gather this information, so we don't spend a lot of time gathering things that aren't going to really
Right.
be helpful in the end. So I've said enough. Frank, I'm really
So it,
interested in what you
having
got.
looked at that for a few years now, in my humble opinion, which I am certainly open to objection or discussion, I think it's a two-pronged approach. And I agree with Kathy that we are not going to change the needle on this overnight. I think this is a multi-year lookout of where we want to be, where we want these schools to be in relationship to their support of this community that serves them. So the two-pronged approach, which I have looked at in the past, and again, open to suggestions, is one, we have to understand what the other communities are getting paid. How effective is the issue of pilot in other communities that have these kind of schools, right? So that's why what Michelle has been doing is so important. Find out what their numbers are in relationship to the size of their town, which is the next step, and essentially how much are those schools costing their residential taxpayers, right? And what are those towns getting out of it? So one is, how much money should we be expecting in relationship to the size of these schools and the size of our town? And a really other step two, or the other side of this, is how did they do it? What's the answer to get them agreeing? I mean, I remember this quote from the CEO of Fay how many years ago when he was asked for pilot money, and the answer was, we don't have to do it, therefore we won't. I mean, come on. That's not nice community living, right? So how did these other towns do it? Do they have, what kind of relationship do they have with the schools? Is it a handshake agreement? Is it a written contract? I know it varies. Phillips has a written contract that is negotiated, I think, every 3 years. So I think that's the other side of the coin, is what's the best approach. So look at the 20 or 30 schools that we decide upon and find out how they do it. I don't want to hear about like Concord and whatever that other one was that gets no money. But how are the successful ones doing it? What's their approach? And so then we can go to the select board and say, here's the kind of funding we feel that these schools should be contributing. And two, here's some suggestions on how other towns have achieved this. Perhaps we can do it this way.
So I have a couple of observations to make. The first is I agree with Kathy in that I think what we're going to discover and should expect is that there's going to be information all over the map and what those relationships are like between towns and schools and what schools offer. So we should anticipate, if we think of this as a kind of scattergram, it might look like a big blob. Okay, so the one of the questions that I would have is, can we get a sample? Can we identify a sample? And with that sample, can we actually identify a trend that would be relevant to us making a recommendation back to the full town, right? In other words, step one is going to be, let's get a sample and let's see if we can actually identify a trend of any kind, right? That would help inform, give some basis to a direction we might take in terms of a recommendation for the town. A complicating variable that we haven't mentioned, and this may come as a surprise, I think, to some folks, but I am aware that some towns simply don't ask for payment in lieu of taxes. So it may not be.
That's probably another question to add, Michelle, to, if they don't get anything, is do they try? Is there an app?
So I just think, yeah. So before we jump to the conclusion that schools have not given, the question is, have they been asked even? Right, which may come as some surprise, but we might all imagine certain towns in the Commonwealth that are in a different budget position than we are, and for which this is not their highest level concern, right? And I think the other piece that I would throw in as we have this conversation, and this is the part that I don't know how we quantify this, right? I came into this committee thinking we need to try to quantify as much as we can, and I think that's valuable. But I think there are some towns that have this ineffable, wrong verb, wrong noun. This sense of value add of the school being simply a private school in the community that might draw residents, right? That might be a draw into the town. How we measure that, I don't know, but I think that we're going to see some of that as well. So I think my recommendation in terms of process is that we have that we identify a target number of schools, which might be similar to Fays or St. Mark's in some fashion. Get information down on that we don't already have, and identify whether we're seeing a trend or not. I think because that can then lead us to the next step. Is there a trend such that we can do more research and develop a proposal that way? Or are we developing a proposal or recommendation based on moral suasion and not data? Does that make sense? I'd love to clarify the trend.
The trend of what exactly? Of
In
how
other
much-
words, whether there is a relationship, a correlation, right, between schools of a certain size and towns and what payments. Can we identify a pattern, right? Or is it going to be all over the map? If it's all over the map, then really just basing ultimately our conversation on St. Mark's and Fay, right? And our town, and just on the data within our town. If there's a pattern that we can see across towns that starts to emerge, great. Then we've got data to move a recommendation forward based on that information. That's what I'm trying to say, if that makes sense.
So I'm going to hazard a guess that there is no pattern based on what I know. It would not be hard for me to give this group a list of what St. Mark's and Fay look at as their competitors when they set their tuition in the fall. So in the fall, the finance committee of each school is meeting to determine what they're going to propose for tuition and budget for the next year. And they look around, they look at the competitor because they know that they can't get outside a range. They got to stay within a range because it is a competitive business. And people do look at the cost before they decide where they're going to apply. So they don't want to be the leader of the pack as far as tuition goes. They want to see what everybody else is doing. So I'd say there's probably 10 to 15 schools that St. Mark's looks at. Same thing for Fay, as far as who they really consider their competitors as far as where these kids are going to apply. That list is not hard to get. I can get that. And then maybe focus on those schools as far as what they're doing with their town. I can say these are just some data points. I know for a fact that remember, each school has a board of trustees, right? And those board of trustees, in large part, if you're talking about a boarding school like St. Mark's, consist of people from throughout there. These are not people in Southborough. In fact, probably hardly anyone's from Southborough. They're from all over. A lot of them are parents. So they live in their own towns. A lot of times they live in affluent towns too. And some of them know about pilot payments, some don't. So there is definitely an education factor. When I first went over last year to meet with St. Mark's, I asked to meet with the board, and the CFO and the head were very surprised. And so I backed off because I could see the surprise. And I said, okay, if you think that that's not the better approach, I said, I just think, it takes some pressure off you guys. If the board said to you, we really want you to increase pilot payments. We really, we realize now that the town is supplied, police and fire and roads and everything else that we need other than schools. But they didn't want me to do that. Faith School is different. Faith School had a really strong chair for a long time. He just now retired. And he controlled that decision, not the head. He told the head what to do. So you got to know your school too, as far as the dynamics there. There's other things that we could talk about doing too that might result in more revenue. That's not just a pilot payment. That would be a required payment. We can get to that a little bit later, which includes a assessment for impervious surfaces, a stormwater usage fee. So we can talk about that too. But you know, in the end, it's going to be the person you're dealing with, what they think, how their budget looks. And remember, a lot of these schools do have endowments, but they're restricted. People donate money not to pay for Southborough's roads. They donate money because they want to fund scholarships or buildings or something else. And so a lot of those endowments are restricted. Most schools take a piece of their endowment out every year to help fund their budget, 4%, 5%, whatever. But they don't have a lot of, you know, unfettered assets to pick from. So this is a amount that they have to consider in their operating budget, for which they cover mostly by tuition, but also, as Frank probably knows, they have an annual fund each year. So they go out to parents and alumni and request current year donations to cover that gap between what they receive for tuition and what their costs are. So they're not flushing cash every year. They're actually short with their tuition as far as covering their budget. So I think it helps understanding all that as far as how we approach this, because we're asking them to basically increase the amount budgeted year over year for pilot payments. But I still say the good news with St. Mark's at least is that they've got $100,000 in that budget for us at this point. May not sound like much, but it's a lot more than it used to be.
It's a lot. That's a lot more than it used to be.
Yeah, it's going in the right direction, and they know, and they absolutely intend to increase it every year by inflation. And I think that they also believe that if they were to buy any other property to take it off the tax roll, they understand we expect them to pay an equivalent amount of tax, pay an equivalent amount of what the taxes would be. I think that's kind of embedded too. That's not there. We're just not that far with Faye. Faye's where I think we've really got to focus more.
I understand the idea of looking at their competitors and who they're competing with in order to get set their tuition. But to some extent, I feel like that's letting the school lead the discussion. I could be wrong here. I go ahead, Michelle. You're muted.
Yep. So I agree. I mean, my question is, do we have any guidelines of what it costs the town to provide services for these schools?
We do.
We do. Kathy, go.
We do. So roughly, our budget, call it, it's about $60 million. About 30% of that covers services that we provide other than the school. Schools are the lion's share of our budget. It's about 70%. So throw those out, right? They shouldn't have to pay for our public schools. The services that are provided is about 30%. So call that, you know, $15 million or so as far as what we'd like to see them participate in. So you can do the math. You could say, okay, if they were taxable, how much of that they would pay. So that computation's been done. I haven't seen it in a while, but it's easy to do as far as what they would pay if they really were paying for what they use. And it's still a lot more than what they're paying. I will say that the number's still going to be bigger than $100,000 for St. Mark's.
It's a lot more.
It's
right.
probably 300, 400, something like that.
Well, and you're not even taking, you're subtracting out the entire school budget, but there are students from their campus that go to our public schools.
And there's
So-
more from our public school that go there. So you gotta, you know, I don't think you
Yes,
can.
but those people are, no, I'm sorry, I'm not equating that, Kathy. I don't agree with that argument because those have parents who are paying that private school tuition out of choice. Okay? They are sending their students to our public schools, and that's not our choice. That, you know, we are supporting those public schools with that added on. And I have never yet been able to get the number of students from those private schools, from the families of those private schools who are outsourced to schools. For example, what we were talking about earlier tonight, Kathy. We don't know, I don't personally know what that number was. I have not, the school department was not willing to give up that. So, but I know it's more than one, and those are high target, costs to outsource students to other schools.
Patty, can you walk me through a little bit the rationale on saying why the choice versus the requirement is important if in fact the flow is neutral or even benefits the public schools that kids go to private schools? I didn't quite follow that.
Well, I don't understand the argument actually of why you're saying that because family A decides to send their child to St. Mark's, that offloads the burden of them in our public school, correct? Is that
Right. So
the argument?
I believe so.
So
Yes.
we're not paying for that child from that family to go to our public school, right? So then what, we should allow the same number of students to come out of a private school to go to our public school? Is that the point?
Well, if I understand, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I think pointing out is that is that if you've got a family living in Southborough, owns a property, pays taxes, sends their child to a private school, they don't stop paying the taxes to the public school.
That's
Right.
correct. And there's a lot
I
more
understand that.
kids in Southborough that go to St. Mark's and Fay than the teachers, employees, whatever of St. Mark's that send their kids to our public
I-
schools. It's not even close.
Are you sure about that, Kathy?
Yes.
Do you have actual numbers? Because that is a swing from what I remember it being.
Yeah, I had numbers. I haven't had them in a couple years, and I can tell you right now, St. Mark's will absolutely make that argument right off the bat. If you say, "Well, we've got," your kids are going to say, "We got many more coming our way," and they give a lot of the kids in Southborough scholarships. So there's a lot of kids from Southborough that actually do get either reduced tuition. St. Mark's gives about 25%, Frank, of their gross tuition as financial aid. And a big chunk of that goes to Southborough students, especially Fay too. So we can debate that. Clearly they use services, no doubt about it, and they acknowledge that,
Right.
which is why they're making these payments. They know that, and that's why they are. St. Mark's absolutely is. We've got a very stable CFO. He's been there for a while, so he is doing his best to boost us up. So we're not having to beg him like we used to. Fay, we're still begging.
And Kathy, I think last time you pointed out that you would hope to have a better relationship with Harvard and garner more money from them. Is
Yes,
that true?
that one I'm really determined to do, just because they really do have a big endowment, and they are pretty generous with pilot payments. Look at what Michelle's numbers showed us. So yeah, I think that we've got a pretty good chance of they used to give us road money, and then for some reason they stopped giving us road money. Now just do police and fire. So I just think they should go back and start making a contribution for roads.
They don't use the same kind of services. They're just the level of services that the other schools do, though, right?
No,
Yeah.
they're not going to have a kid pull a fire alarm or
Right.
OD or something like that. So no, they don't. But I still think they are very appreciative of why you need pilot payments made as far as an institution goes.
Mhm.
Okay. Other thoughts? So I think that we were talking about the next steps that we had would be, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll divvy up the remainder of the list to ease the burden from Michelle. And, anybody that wants to, step in and make some calls. I should have some significant time next week.
Me too, Michelle, and I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah.
a tax person. October 15th is I just gotta get to October 15th. And then I really will,
Yeah.
I am gonna roll up my sleeves on this. I am sorry that the
Yeah.
burden was, basically.
So are we agreeing that that is a valid pursuit, the kind of information that Michelle is gathering, correct?
I think it's relevant. I think it informs us.
Can I
Michelle,
ask a question? So I don't know about meeting rooms. Can you meet in between to gather data? So say if you had some time, Patty, and I had some time, we worked at a list, or Kathy or Frank has time to work on a list. Does that violate any open meeting laws or anything like that?
Two people don't. So you can meet
Right.
with one other person. We just can't have a quorum meet. So you
it has
can
to be
have.
left. So it's like, when I spoke with you, Michelle, about all of that stuff on the town website or whatever, that's fine. But I can't have a conference call with you and Frank and talk about it.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes, I think that's a good next step. Let's keep going. Let's see if we identify a discernible trend or not. Kathy, I hear Kathy's point very well, and I think that may well be the case. So, but let's see what we can find out. And then I think there might be also some time, if we haven't already, to talk about Chapter 766 schools and where NECC NEC fits into this. And, I think it's helpful to just have that information out. I can certainly share what I know. Kathy, you could share from your conversation. That would also be a good agenda item.
I told Patty, coincidentally, I had a meeting with NEC recently. I was at one of our local gas stations and backed into one of their cars. And so I went by that afternoon to say, look,
I don't think that's not the meeting she's talking about.
Yeah.
So, but as I was saying that, the director of development heard my voice, comes downstairs and he goes, Kathy Cook? I said, yeah. He goes, I said, how did you know? He goes, I recognize your voice from select board meetings, and my wife served with you in the Southborough Ed Foundation. So we had a really, really good talk
Great.
about all the stuff. So more to
Great.
come on NEC for sure.
Perfect. Okay. And I'll get my email
okay.
fixed up also. Sorry about that, but yes, the email, I have the email, but for some reason I'm having trouble accessing it, and your stuff is getting bounced back, so I have to check on that. Thanks.
Do you just deal with Jason or Hassan?
I'll contact them.
And I think it depends on whether you use a desktop client, or because I had some issues with the Outlook in the calendar.
Okay.
Using it through a desktop client because I'm not a Southborough employee, but if you do it online, it works.
Okay. Sounds good.
Because we really need to be able to communicate because of FOIA. We need to deal with you through your town email address. All right, so I'm going to put on the next agenda a discussion for the 766 goals, because I think we need to discuss that and people's opinion on how that is pursued. I'll put up tomorrow, hopefully, might actually give me until Friday noon. I'll post the schools, and I'm going to cross-reference that with who Michelle has already talked to. And then if there's anybody in there that you just feel so inclined to contact the town that school is, write your name in. I hope to have some time next week that I can do that. Okay.
Great.
I think we're good. Okay, so we're working on, next item on the agenda is the next meeting. I think we were talking about the second Wednesday of the month, which okay, so November, that's going to be, oh good.
The
Lord,
8th.
there's too many.
November 8th. Yeah.
November 8th.
November 8th.
Yeah.
God, I hate those online calendars. They get so booked. Okay, so November 8th, we're talking. All right, and if anybody has any thoughts on agenda items in the meantime, please, open to it, forward them to me, okay? And I'll make sure that the draft, meeting minutes from last time have been posted to the website, so we stay within, state regulation.
Okay,
All right.
Are we all good? Oh, public comment. We have 0 attendees, so we're gonna have no public comment. All good. All right, thank you, guys. Apologies, I'm gonna have this down as a pro by next time.
All right, so I'll make a motion to adjourn at 7:20, Michelle.
Seconded.
Okay, roll call. Michelle,
aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
Frank,
Aye.
and me. Aye. All good.
All
Thank
in
you so
favor.
much for your time.
Okay,
Thank you.
Everybody.
talk soon.
Night.
Bye.